Hello, everyone. Professor Wood here. And today I want to walk you through the final draft expectations for the critical analysis research paper. For this video, I am going to use one of the student samples provided in Brightspace so that you can see what the paper should look like and what I will be looking for when I grade it. So I'm screen sharing now. To go to our student sample, I'm going to ask you to navigate to the course content page, course homepage in Brightspace. From there, I'm going to have you click on content and then look for the student sample section that's going to be over here on the left-hand side. The sample I'm going to use for this tutorial is the critical analysis research paper student sample. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. I'm going to download it so that I can look at it. Going to go back and share my screen again. Here we go. Okay, so you should actually be able to see it at this point. Okay, so the first thing I want you to notice is the MLA heading in the left-hand side. That's the upper left-hand corner. Your paper should have the same kind of heading. This should include your name, the course, the instructor's name, and the date. We have used this format throughout the course, so this should look familiar by now. Notice in the upper right-hand corner, we do have the last name and the page number as well. Because this is a formal paper, you should also include a title. The title should be centered underneath the heading. It does not have to be overly creative or complicated, but it should clearly connect to your paper. Now, I want you to look at the introduction. Your introduction should be written in your own words. This is very important. You should not use research, quotes, paraphrases, or summaries from outside sources in your introduction. The introduction is where you introduce the literary work, provide a little bit of context, and then move towards your thesis statement. A good introduction usually moves from general to specific. That means you begin with a broader idea about the literary work or topic, and then you narrow your focus until you arrive at your thesis. Your thesis statement should usually appear at the end of the introduction, and that is the main argument of your paper. It needs to tell the reader what you are analyzing and what literary elements or categories your paper will focus on without saying, this is what I'm going to focus on. So, for example, if a paper was about here to build a fire, a thesis might say something along the lines of, I don't know, this story is blah, blah, blah. Now, we're going to go ahead and see if we can find the thesis statement here in this first paragraph. So we have arrogance and overconfidence in oneself can lead to irrational decisions, improper thinking, and even death in worst case scenarios. For instance, in the short story To Build a Fire by Jack London, the struggle of the main character, known as the man, is shown throughout the story as he travels through a cold and snowy trail. Context. Although the theme of human versus nature is prevalent throughout the story and easy to infer, the theme also includes person versus self. This is due to the man's arrogance and rudeness, which leads him into his dangerous situation of walking through the snowy trail after being advised not to. Additionally, the cold weather is only an impartial force and not the true enemy, seeing nature as uncaring and is simply another obstacle the man has to face on his travels. Its purpose is to act as a tool that illustrates to the reader the impact of arrogance and self-confidence in harsh situation. These two themes are illustrated eloquently throughout the story due to London's use of literary devices that encapsulate the man's arrogance, the impacts of being arrogant, and the impartialness of nature. Now, this is not a perfect thesis statement, but it is definitely a thesis statement. So I am going to put in, this is the thesis statement. And now the samples that I show you are not perfect examples. And I want you to remember that as well. They are just examples to be a guide for you as you begin to build your critical analysis research paper. With that being said, the one criticism that I would give this is it needs to actually discuss and name the literary devices. It's too vague. It says uses of literary devices, but what literary devices am I looking for? Now, I'm sure I will find them as I go through, and yes, I will find them as I go through because this is a student sample. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there as well. But the main argument is there. The themes are illustrated through the literary devices that encapsulate the man's arrogance, the impacts of being arrogant, and the impartialness of nature. Okay, so that being said, it gives me categories. It gives me to be the focus of my body paragraphs. And that is where your paper begins to grow. It needs to grow out of your thesis statement. So each body paragraph needs to begin with a topic sentence, and that topic sentence should be in your own words. It tells the reader what the paragraph is about or what you're, as the writer, you're going to explain. So let's look and see what we've got. So we have a transition word here, consequently, the use of characterization. So that's the first literary element that this writer is discussing, has a crucial impact on the events of the story and the theme of the person versus self. Particularly, the characterization of the man as arrogant and disrespectful leads to multiple issues for him that drag out the story. Again, as the reader, I'm looking at this and I'm like, multiple issues, that's too vague. It needs a little bit more specificity to it, but it's not horrible. It just needs a little bit of revision. Now, the author then goes in to say, for instance, the man believes that despite his lack of experience in traveling in cold weather, he will be able to go alone while the temperature is dropping to dangerous levels. Later, he goes on to disregard the cold weather as nothing he should worry about. So the author of this paper is paraphrasing. He's paraphrasing, but he's also summarizing, and that is a very difficult line that students sometimes enter when they're doing critical analysis, is they tend to focus more on summary than analysis. So you have the what, but we need the why and the how. So why is that characterization important? Ultimately, the man's poor choice caused by his arrogance and overconfidence causes him to die by the end of the story. So this paragraph does need a little bit more development, but it does have a parenthetical citation in here. It does have the essence, the elements of what I'm looking for. It would just need a little bit of revision. So we have another transition and we go into the second body paragraph. Furthermore, the author's usage of flashback, so second literary device, emphasizes the man as arrogant and even rude. For example, when another character advises the man not to travel in negative 75-degree weather all by himself, all the man does is laugh. Despite the advice, the man traveled the path alone anyway, even after the temperature dropped to negative 75 degrees. Again, you have the author's name, 126 and 127. There's the page number. This illustrates the fact that due to the man's arrogance, he put himself in the situation that would lead to a turning point in his character and his death. So again, you have that very broad statement, but you do have a little bit of analysis afterwards. Moreover, the implementation of flashbacks indicates that the man had knowledge and power to stop and get help traveling the path. However, he failed simply to do so because of his arrogance. So your author of this paper here is definitely doing a little bit of analysis, but it needs to be a little bit deeper and a little bit more in depth. Now, that being said, this is when your writer begins to bring in the secondary sources in the body paragraph. Additionally, other critics of this story emphasize that the man is arrogant. According to an analysis paper on To Build a Fire, the author regards the man as arrogant and implements other people's opinion in his work. They have argued that the man was not being reasonable by relying on his ability to keep his head and arrogantly ignoring the old timer's advice to travel with a partner. So this is both a student sample of what to do and what not to do, because you've got a couple of different things. So I'm making comments as I go along just so that you can see different things that I'm looking for. This statement here is very vague. So I'm going to type that. I need the title of the paper. for the author's name. It also needs more specificity. Now, the next thing this student did in the student sample is they just did what I call quote dumping, and different teachers call it different things. Is not properly introduced. It would be better to include this information and combine it with the above sentence. So I'm putting that in the comments here, and you can just view the comments by clicking on here. This quote is not properly introduced. So if you combine these two sentences according to an analysis paper, add the title in or the author, and say this person states, and then you don't have to put the author's Whitcomb name, just the page number there. Now, with that being said, after the quote, you do have an analysis sentence. You never want to end a paragraph with a quote. You don't want to give anybody the last word. You want to have the last word as the writer of this analytical paper. So it says, thus, many interpret the man as arrogant and overzealous in his confidence. This characterization leads to the theme of man versus self, since it was the man's arrogance that led him to his dire situation at the end of his story and his death. It's still a little bit surface level, so it needs a little bit more interpretation, but it's not horrific. You do have the parenthetical citation. You do have a little bit of analysis, but again, it's not specific enough. Now, as you continue through your body paragraphs, you want to make sure that you're balancing your own analysis with evidence. Your voice still needs to be the voice guiding the paper. You don't want to over summarize or over analyze. The sources are there to support your argument. They're not there to be the backbone of your argument or replace your thinking. So a strong body paragraph needs to include a topic sentence, evidence from the text, evidence from your secondary sources, an explanation of that evidence, and a closing sentence that connects it all back together. So the way that I teach students to do this is to use the peel method, like you're peeling back a banana or peeling back an orange. You need your point, you need your evidence, you need to explain that evidence, and then you need to link it all back together. Now, with that being said, I don't know, and I'm not going to go through the paper step by step, but I'm checking to see if there's a block quote in here. I don't see any block quotes. Yeah, there's not any block quotes in here. But if you have a quote that is more than 40 words or a quote that is more than 4 lines, according to MLA, it has to be formatted as a block quote, and that'll be indented from the left margin, and it does not use quotation marks. The punctuation also works differently. In a block quote, the period comes before the parenthetical citation. But I caution you to be careful with block quotes. A lot of students are like, oh, I can use a block quote and that will help me with my word count. You don't want to do that to just make your paper longer. If you use a block quote, you have to be able to explain it carefully afterwards, because a long quote without analysis will weaken your paper and the structure of your paper. So, and of course, you'll have time to read through this on your own. So I'm not going to go through the entire paper because I assume that you guys can all read. But I am going to move to the conclusion. So the conclusion should be in your own words. You don't want to introduce new research, new quotes, or new source material in the conclusion. It's your final opportunity to explain the significance of your analysis. So in here, you've got, in essence, despite a large number of readers and critics arguing that To Build a Fire is a story conveying the theme of man versus nature, another prevalent theme, although less believed, is person versus self, or internal conflict. To arrive at this verdict, the use of weather as an impartial entity and tool to bring out the man's arrogance and eventual realization, as well as the man's character at the beginning and end of the story, needs to be considered. So that is a very well developed, it's a long sentence. Long 2 sentences, could probably be revised a little bit, but again, the student needed to meet the word count as well. In the beginning, the man is arrogant. Again, you do have a lot of information here. Now, To achieve this point, the author used the weather. I would say London employed the weather and not used. We want to try not to overuse the word uses or used. The weather not as an antagonist, but as an instrument to eliminate the man's arrogance by placing him in a life or death situation. That being said, it is a solid conclusion. It is original. It doesn't have any research in there, all of that. So most definitely, it's not a horrible paper. It does need a little bit of revising work, but it is a good, solid student sample. Now, that being said, I'm going to move on to the works cited page. So for this assignment, you should have your primary source, which is your literary work that comes from your textbook, and then your required secondary sources from the SFSC databases. So here, also, it is alphabetical. So we have here the author from James Bowen, and we have the title of the article. One thing I will note is it is from a journal, and so because it's from a journal, it does need to be in italics. And so I'm fixing that right now. But we do have here every bit of the information that is required. Notice the second line has that hanging indent. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to authors' names, their titles, the containers, the database information, and hanging indents. Because one of the things that I check immediately is I want to check to make sure your in-text citations match the sources on your works cited page. If your paper does not include parenthetical citations or a works cited page, it does not meet the minimum requirements for this assignment. That can result in a 0 for you. So I caution you to make sure that you have everything you need for the paper. So just make sure that you check it carefully before you submit it. So we have the first source, and then we have the primary source, and then we have another secondary peer-reviewed source. So before you submit your final draft, you want to review the following. You want to make sure that your paper has the correct MLA heading. You want to make sure your title is centered. You want to make sure your introduction and conclusion are in your own words. You want to make sure that your thesis is clear and placed near the end of the introduction. You want to make sure that your body paragraph, in each body paragraph, has a topic sentence, and that you are utilizing evidence from both the literary work and the scholarly sources dispersed equally throughout. Make sure that every single quote, paraphrase, or summary has a parenthetical citation, and make sure that your works cited page is included and formatted correctly. And finally, make sure that your file is submitted in the correct formats. With that being said, this concludes this tutorial on the final draft of the critical analysis research paper. I urge you to use the student samples, the assignment directions, and the rubric as guides while you revise your own paper. And if you have questions, please reach out before the deadline. I'm happy to help, but you need to ask early enough in order to make changes. With that being said, I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and I am looking forward to reading your papers. Thank you so much for watching.